We're going to continue taking a look at what it takes to actually do the HTML tag checker so we can talk about how we can work with this. We've been talking earlier about the idea of the logic needed. We had a whole video that went over that. And again, we have the series of tests needed to breaking that problem down so you can solve those pieces and work with that. One of the big things you want to remember as you're working with the idea of that logic is the idea of using the nested if structure. By using the nested if structure, you're able to make sure that, oh, I have this test, and once I've passed it, I move in and go to the deeper test. If I don't pass it, then I exit out, and I return, of course, that false value. I only continue in and go deeper into that knowledge, or I go deeper into the string and get a better evaluation of that, as long as I continue passing the tests. And I want to use the idea of the nested if, so there's this test, and I go inside, it has this thing. I go inside deeper, and it has this thing, because it's a lot easier to troubleshoot and write code and iterate over than one huge, giant mega test like this, because then you have to oh, I've got this. You have to try and read that all at once as one coherent mental thing. And again, we're writing code to make humans easier to read and understand versus the computer. And having it broken down into easy, having our code broken down in easy to parse chunks make it easier for our human brain to understand, and also makes it easier to debug and look at later on when we're coming back and reviewing this and trying to use this in a different fashion for maybe a different problem in the future. So again, the idea of nested ifs, and take a look at that earlier video we have on how we can break down our problem and go from there. The next step we want to talk about are the actual methods we use to actually solve this problem. Now, when we're looking at the idea of doing an HTML tag checker, trying to find out what is a valid HTML tag, there's some methods in string that we want to specifically use to make sure that happens. And so the ones we're working with specifically, index of with a single string parameter is the first string you want to use. Do I have an angle bracket open or close inside that? And then to take that a step further so it's easier to work with and identify the specific part of the string we're looking with, we want to use the second or the overloaded version of index of, which takes a string and an int as a parameter. The two-parameter string int index of allows us to find the occurrence of a string after that next index. Oh, so I can go and look past this and find that next spot. That's very helpful to find the first opening spot, or the that's very helpful for finding the first closing tag after the first opening tag, and making sure you find a closing tag after the closing slash tag that we have of a closing HTML tag. That makes things very easy to find the correct indices that you're looking for inside the string as we actually go through and look at that. The substring method, for some bizarre reason, we have to get substrings out of this. We have to find out the actual substring of the opening tag, the substring of the closing tag, and the actual keyword itself that's inside both of those tags so we can actually work with those. And finally, the dot equals method. We want to compare that the correct value of the keyword in the opening tag is the same value as the keyword in the closing tag, and making sure that's correct. And so dot equals. I always prefer using dot equals over the dot compare to, because the zero valuation, that's not what I'm looking for. I want to see is this string equal to this string. And so those two strings are how you want to make that comparison, not comparing to whether or not it has a zero value. No, I want to make sure they're equal. So that's my personal preference on how we do that. The next step we have is how do we actually put those together as we work through this. And so that's where we talk about the idea of the local variables. And again, this is based on my original three-part evaluation structure. So you can see if we have the minimal test, the expanded test, and then we have the minimal test, the expanded test, and the complex tag test. And so that's what I'm looking for. And so these are the values I'm thinking would be really helpful to understand and work with as you try and actually solve an HTML tag checker. So the first ones we have three int values representing the information of the indices of the opening tag. The first one is open tag, open bracket index. And again, I'm using a really far spelled Again, I'm using really spelled out names so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So when I look at my logic, I know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's easier to have a lovely big word and actually figure out what it is, and so you don't have to worry about figuring out what your abbreviations were, especially when you come back to something that's, say, at 3 in the morning, or you're trying to get this crammed done before you do an assignment. So giving out things that actually have good names for that makes it really easy. So open tag, open bracket index, when you first see the idea of the open tag angle bracket, the open tag close bracket index, when do I see this? And then the open tag start index, aka this whole thing, and right here. And so I should see that whole thing. And so at this right here, as you see, I have the blue asterisk on that, and those must match. If we have an actual opening bracket, they need to be there, and that has to be a value that we see. For strings, we want the actual opening tag as a string, the entire concept right here. The closing tag, again, making sure we have the appropriate tag with that. And then the keyword, the actual text that goes inside those two values. We want to make sure we have those three strings identified as local variables so we can work with that. And then finally, the same corresponding ints for the closing tag. The closing tag opening bracket index, which is where we just see this sequence right here. We have the open bracket with the slash. And the closing tag, the correct closing tag. And then we have the closing tag start index right here. And again, this matches right here for the entire thing, and this matches for the individual spot with that brown asterisk right here that they must match. And these can't match. We can't have the opening tag match right here and this close tag match. Those can't match at all. So we have to make sure that we have the correct indices of things, making sure we don't have the right values and they're not -1, because if it's not found, obviously it fails the actual purpose in there. I hope this is a helpful review to go a little bit deeper on how we can actually solve the idea of an HTML tag checker. Cheers and have a great day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.